Welcome to the Navigating My Crazy podcast. I'm Shayla. Navigating My Crazy is a weekly podcast created for moms trying to balance life, family, purpose, and wanting to improve their mental wellness. Our goal is to inspire conversations necessary to end the stigma associated with mental health and the unrealistic societal expectations related to being a mom. But most importantly, to create a community so that no mom ever feels alone as we all navigate this crazy thing called life together. Let's start this show. Today we'll be discussing the impacts of early education and literacy. Joining me in this discussion, I have Jamie Mays. Thank you, Jamie, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
So Jamie is an advocate for empowerment through education, literature, and literacy because she was able to gain her independence and exit from poverty through these important concepts. Her belief is that we teach others to read and think for themselves. We give them the power to achieve their desires. Jamie has been in education for over 12 years and written 6 books. She has a bachelor's degree in English, a master's degree in secondary education, and education specialist degree in instructional leadership. She is an author, speaker, and owner of Jamie Mays Educational Consulting and Literacy Service. Jamie also has 21 years of experience as a trained professional speaker. And if you ever get the opportunity to read one of her poetry books or listen to her recite poetry, it is a life-changing experience.
Oh, thank you.
Her most recent work is the Mommy and Me cookbook, which is co-authored with her 5-year-old son. So thank you again, Jamie, for joining me.
Thank you.
We have so much to talk about. I've had the great experience of joining one of the groups that Jamie has on Facebook. I think initially you may have had it set up for teachers. She's also invited other people that are involved in children's education, which of course are parents like myself. So it just kind of gives a balance to the conversations when talking about education and students, because me, of course, as a parent, I had bias or a certain expectation of teachers when it comes to teaching my child who has some reading and issues because he has ADHD, but then just understanding from a teacher's perspective and really the things that they're expected to do based on, the education system. It has really given me insight on the work that I need to do personally with him versus the expectation of the school and teachers. So I appreciate you and that group also.
Thank you.
Wanted to
I appreciate that insight. Thank you. We appreciate that insight. That's one of the biggest missions, is to create a cohesive balance among everyone so that we understand how education is a collaborative effort. And so as educators, what can we do to make sure that we are informing parents, supporting parents, and engaging parents comfortably? As parents, what can we do to support our teachers and understand exactly what their roles and demands are? And as community stakeholders, how do they fit into what we do? They have a lot of resources out there. How can we partner with them to move education forward for our kids? So we wanted to create that community where we are bringing the conversation forward and everybody is in the same hub now. We have a community there where we can actually talk and look at things and hear each other's opinions and really grow to have more respect and support for each other so that our kids are the priority in the middle of this educational experience.
You've been in education for a while, for 12 years. As far as the evolution of teaching and education, what are some improvements that you've seen over the 12 years? And now with technology being in the forefront, what are some things that you've seen change?
For me, one of the biggest things I really appreciated, and I think that because a lot of people don't necessarily understand, we've seen a lot of rejection with what has been the Jump Start program. The goal of the Jump Start program is really to give our kids more opportunities when they leave high school. And once I was able to sit down and actually study the components for myself and look at what programs I've seen coming through various schools, It reminds me of the older days when they had shop classes and home ec and everything already, and they're really just bringing the ball back around and seeing the necessity of them and actually giving kids the ability to leave high school with a training certificate or whatever they need and helping them chart a pathway. And I think that that's one of the biggest things, because even when I was coming out of high school as a first generation college student, I didn't really understand the pathway. I was just feeling my way along. And I just so happened to have a cousin that was already at the university we wanted to attend, who did my paperwork. My mother was not a college graduate, had not even enrolled, so she didn't know. And we had to feel our way along. But programs like this actually help the kids get a clearer pathway to the future. And so if we can continue to roll that back, I'm looking at our elementary schools, and I see these community gardens coming about, something I love as a gardener, as a parent, as a hands-on learning advocate, seeing those gardens come into play, seeing schools invest in programs that are also teaching our kids skills at a younger age. That is very, very important. And that's one of the most wonderful things I've seen. And I think that technology has had a very valuable part in making these resources accessible. And so whether it's showing them videos of the information, finding online programs that give them access in a less expensive way, or just giving them the ability to see things quicker through a technology lens, technology has given us quicker access to giving our kids opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't have. And so I have seen some great things evolve through this technology system that I think are so useful for helping our kids get more opportunities and connect around the world. But sometimes it's hard for our kids to get outside of their physical space that they live in. But if we can tap into technology and show them things across the world, show them videos across the world, it gives them a desire to really figure out how they can get to that place. Those are some of the great things I think I'm seeing, is giving them those opportunities.
Right. And a lot of your experience was secondary education. What are some of the things that you found that you did as a teacher to kind of help encourage the students to do the reading that you assigned them?
The first thing is find things that relate to them. And sometimes it's hard because we have a curriculum. But for me, even if it meant finding 5-minute readings to interject, I found something that was relatable. I always started my lessons by talking to my kids about the background of the author, because a lot of times it's not the content that may trigger their interest, but knowing where that person came from, what their background was, what their life was like. And so bringing that element into the classroom was very big. And when my students found a way to connect to, even if it wasn't the story, but the author, it triggered their interest. The second part was finding a relatable part for them in the story and making that relatable part interactive for them. I've done a lot of things over the years, everything from when we've read a story called Pancakes, actually having Pancakes Day. When we got to works by Dr. Maya Angelou, showing a video that they had never seen about Dr. Maya Angelou. When we studied Nikki Giovanni, even though it was a very short poem, at this time I had met Nikki Giovanni and talking about that experience. The other part is having enthusiasm as a teacher. I was a nerd and I was very open and comfortable about it. And I talked to my kids about being comfortable in your skin. And we have to encourage, especially secondary students, to be comfortable with academia, because there's a lot of pressure for them to be invested in other things, but not to be invested in academia. And so I tried to be very open about how much I enjoyed learning and how much I wanted them to enjoy it and how much I cared about their future. And really caring for our kids makes them do things because they want to make you happy. Mm-hmm. And so that also got them motivated to get involved. But I also had the expectation of treating them as intellectuals. I tried to create a classroom atmosphere where I did not look at myself as solely the dictator of learning, but one that valued their opinions and their engagement in conversation. Quite often, I put my classroom in a circle. I'm not standing, I'm sitting with you. We have our textbooks out and I want to hear what you have to say. So when you come the next day, I want you to be ready for conversation. And so I tried to make sure to involve them as an open mind. And instead of saying, no, that's not correct, that's not what I'm looking for, navigate them to the pathway of learning and knowledge, and teaching them how to research for themselves and how to access knowledge and how to understand and how to improve their reading skills. And so those are some of the things that I try to do, giving the leadership to them in the classroom, relating to them within the text, and being open about that enthusiasm and motivation for learning. And look, it doesn't happen overnight. But I had to make sure that when I tried to show up, I showed up with the same attitude every day, which is our mission is to learn. And I wasn't the easy teacher. I was cracked the whip, and I'm not giving up today. But keeping that mindset of I know my students can achieve, in my opinion, helped a lot of them and hopefully impacted a lot of them in a positive way. So not only did they become avid readers, many of them developed a passion and interest in writing. And I tried to give them power of the pen. We had poetry writing class. We shared poetry, share your poetry, share somebody else's poetry, but let's talk about it. And so it made my heart warm to see them do so well. And so that played a significant part in it too, like really being engaged with the learning process and a passion for seeing them succeed. It plays a lot more of a role than we think it does. Because if it's one child that it helps or one young man, then imagine what he can do when he goes into the world, right? That's how we revolutionize education. We can only do so much without parents that are involved. And that makes you feel great, because then you're like, okay, if I know what the parents expect, that gives me another angle that I can work from. And that's why the Education Roundup 360 is also an important community for everybody.
Yes, I agree. And so I know as far as your consulting and literary services has been, 8 years?
I actually wrote my first book 8 years ago, but we actually launched the company officially a year and a half ago. But I was doing consulting work prior.
So what were you seeing in schools or were not seeing in schools that led you to decide that this was a need?
The first thing were some serious problems with literacy. I've worked in 4 different schools, and actually 5, because I even taught school virtually. And with all of them, I would see severe issues with reading. And so we're talking about kids that have come to high school, and the expectation for the teacher is no different. You still have to be able to help that student excel on state testing. And if I'm giving students that are reading on the 3rd grade level or 6th grade level or 7th grade level, I even had some that were as low as 1st grade level, I was like, well, what am I supposed to do in this instance with these kids? And as I continued to work with students over the years and started to have the experience of seeing students do well on testing that came to me on a 1st grade level, 3rd grade level, state passing score average is 98% for my students, 96% for my students, I said, I have to take the science of what I'm learning as a teacher to use with other people and to show others how to become empowered. And it's not easy. It is a huge undertaking because it's not just how you instruct. It's how you connect with your students. It's the relationship you build. It's understanding phonetics. It's going back to those early parts and teaching them that once you master the skill, it's application of the skill consistently. It's waking up every day feeling refreshed and energized as a teacher and being at my best. I've had to work over the years to improve as a teacher and as a person in order to help my students become better. And so eventually I didn't just want to see that in my classroom because I thought to myself, as a writer, you're producing more books. But if we don't build the number of people who can read and engage in conversation, who will you talk to? Right. So now the mission has to be to share more of this information with our students that are across the world so that we can also help other teachers increase the rate of reading, increase literacy ability for our kids. Because check this out, when we give our kids the power of literacy, we give them the power to do anything they want to do in the world. And that was something I knew firsthand. When my mother developed a passion for reading for me as a little kid, she didn't have much, but she started reading with me, and that made the difference. When I needed an intervention in my life as a child who was suffering with depression, I picked up my pen and started writing, and writing became the mechanism that over 20 years later has carried me through. So I say, if it revolutionized my life as a child who grew up in poverty, a single parent home, who had absolutely nothing, who lived in a community where there was a financial disparity, where we were poor, but other people were rich, where there were racial issues. When I learned the power of my pen and I transferred what was on that pen into my voice, then I was able to change my future and also create a change for others. So what is my responsibility now? To share that with as many other teachers as I can so that they can maximize success for their students, right? And so that's really what put me on this pathway. Like I thought to myself, what's next? You see what works for you. How can I help other schools and other teachers and principals get this same concept for their kids?
That's really amazing. What changes have you seen with some of the initiatives that you've brought to the principals and brought to the teachers? What changes have you been able to inspire others to incorporate?
Last year, I had the opportunity to work with a school district, and I took the Louisiana Department of Education writing rubric, and I actually turned it into used their mascot to turn it into like a school rubric that aligned with that. And I actually taught the teachers how it aligned and showed them exactly what components it linked into directly. But we needed something that was going to be a school-wide rubric that was easy for a PE coach to use, that was easy for a social studies teacher to use, anybody. And the principal actually turned it into a school-wide model. And as a result, he said it was in every single classroom, and people memorized the acronym so well that the kids were actually applying it in writing skills. And so they were able to see improvements. I've been fortunate, and sometimes I do just one-day workshops where we're talking about poetry or we're teaching kids to write their own plays, but actually seeing those kids show interest and say, since then, I've written more plays. Or to actually open up and talk about stories and trauma and life experiences that we've never heard before. A couple of weeks ago, I was invited to talk to some children at church, and I was speaking with the children at church just about different things and encouraging them to use a little model that I have to talk about how they can serve more with their head and their hands and their feet. Once again, implementing literacy into the conversation. And by the time we finished, my church member said, "We've never had this kind of response with the program. This young man doesn't talk." So even opening that conversation, I made sure to get with him before he left to say, "I'm so glad to hear about how powerful you were today, and I hope you continue this." That's the beginning. Planting the seed is the beginning. And these are some of the things that I've been able to see. But even as a classroom teacher, I have students who are working on PhDs. I have a student who just finished his first podcast. These are amazing stories to hear. You want to see this happen for them. You want to see them become world changers. You want to see them evolve. And so getting to share these stories is the amazing part of what I've been fortunate to do, not just in terms of the company, but saying the proof is even seeing my students years later as a teacher and saying it works.
Right. So graduating, becoming a teacher, and then 5 years ago, you become a parent.
Yes.
So now you get to implement this.
Yes.
So what were some of the things that you really honed in on with your own son?
Look, I tell my students the torture that I put upon them, I now get to do upon my own.
Right. Because now you go from being the teacher to being the parent, which is kind of different.
Very different.
So what was some things that you knew early on that you wanted to implement?
One of the first things was a regular habit of reading. And that wasn't even because of science. It was really because my mom did it at a very early age. She bought me a lot of books. When I was 4 years old, my mother had to keep me at home an extra year because they changed the age limit for Head Start. And my mother went and bought resources, not having a lot of money, saving up what she had to save up to buy books and resources. And I did workbooks at home for a year. So I knew that because of that, that was the pathway that got me going. And I needed to do that for him. So investing in books and reading books with him every day. But I also didn't do baby talk. No baby talk. When we started talking, it was plain standard English. It was, "Hello, Lee. How are you? I hope your day is good." And honestly, before he was 6 months, he was, things like that. Our kids are already trying to mimic our sounds. So he was trying to mimic those sounds already. By the time he was 1, he was speaking. He was talking. Mm-hmm. Now at 5, his vocabulary is very extensive because we've never used baby talk. We've always spoken in plain English. In addition to that, by the time he was 3, we were already working on reading. And this is the part that we have to talk about, because we even had a discussion in the group about not moving too quickly with our kids. Mm-hmm. I remember my mother said, don't try to push him too quickly. I know that you're a teacher, so don't push him. And I really took those words to heart when she said that, because I recognize that I'm a very active person, very excited. But I definitely have tried to let my son lead the way with learning, right? Because the goal is not to make it seem like, he has to be, he has to be a mega genius. He has to be whoever he would like to be, but we want him to be well educated when he does it. It just so happens that he is a child who is highly invigorated by learning, which is exciting for his mama.
Right.
Because he is. Right now, he wants to learn math. He wants to add and subtract. He's already practicing 1 + 1, 2 + 2, 3 + 3, because he likes it. But what we did was we just established a climate of learning here at home with me, with his grandma, making sure that when he goes to my mom's house, he has a set of workbooks there. Here at home, he has a set of workbooks here. We keep a set of workbooks in the car so that the learning atmosphere is always present. And when we established that climate of learning, or when I built that climate of learning here, he takes it with him everywhere he goes. He's always interested in the color of things, the spelling of things. He's always interested in digging deeper in his vocabulary and wanting to share what he knows. He loves YouTube videos. Look, we started out with, it was Mickey Mouse and Tom and Jerry, but now he wants to watch a shark video. He calls everything the secret life of sharks, the secret life of dogs. And after we finish, we're able to ask questions. And so developing a desire for learning at a young age starts by very simply talking to them in plain English, reading with them each day. And even before I knew he was old enough to answer questions about the books, still asking him very simple things. What do you see on this book cover, Lee? Tell me what you see. What colors do you see? And then going to the next level, who are the characters you remember in this book? What happened with this character? And pressing, each as he got older, I continued to just increase the complex questions that I asked. And then we moved from the books to the learning videos. And then eventually when we started cooking, it went from just helping him pour things in there to now my son can actually get on the stove and cook a lot of things on his own. All of that was instrumented as a part of the learning process. And so just making it a natural part of our life has been the biggest thing. And when I formulated that desire for learning as a natural part of life, he became a kid that just enjoys it. And so talking to him very early, engaging in those type of powerful conversations with the kids is vital. And when we do that, and it becomes a natural part of us. Mm-hmm. We don't think sometimes that we're cut out for it. People say, because you're a teacher. Yeah, but I'm not a teacher all day. I come home too when I'm like, I want to kick my feet up, especially after 120 kids a day. Right. But when I continue to make it a natural part of the learning environment, it's just that I had nothing else I expected but to develop that type of relationship with my son, where learning is just how we live. When we turned it on and you saw the back wall, mm-hmm. and you thought instantly it was his room, I created a space for him within my space, right? Mm-hmm. He gets up every day and he climbs on that map and he wants me to name some more of those states. And now just by doing that, he started repeating, I know where Texas is. Mm-hmm. I know where Montana is located. I know where California is. And now it's going to, when are we going to these?
Right. Because he wants to do the book tour.
That too. But that's how we've cultivated that culture of learning here at home. And so he takes that concept with him wherever he goes. We can do that as parents, but you don't have to be a teacher to create that atmosphere of learning. You just have to have a desire to get it going within the household.
Right. And it was something good that you said. And of course, now rewinding, I wish I would have done. We read all the time. He enjoyed listening to me read. But one of the things that I didn't implement, which I thought that was really good when you were saying asking the questions afterwards, because that's something that we struggle with now is the reading comprehension. So understanding and really taking in what you've read is something that he's struggling with. He enjoyed listening to me read, mm-hmm. but mm-hmm. just really pulling him into the stories and asking him questions would have really helped with the comprehension part that he's struggling with now.
And so one tip that I often share with people, because I deal with that part of coaching a lot, is parents that say my child reads it, but they can't remember, they can't understand. So I always advise them to go ahead and break it down into segments. If they send you a 10-page story to review or to read with your child, you break that down into 1-page segments. And after that 1 page, your child is to tell you who is doing something, what are they doing, where are they doing it, how are they doing it, and what do you think about the actions that occurred on this page? What is your opinion of it? Those are 5 very simple questions that you can give your child that is going to help them activate their thinking. And so for children who struggle with writing, I say start it off as a verbal concept, and then you take notes for them. Once they have gotten a little better about answering those questions with ease, then you give the writing component to them and you review those answers with them. It may take us a little bit of time when we first start, but the more you do it as a regular habit, the better it becomes. And so eventually you can go from, we're not doing it every 1 page anymore. Now we're doing it every 2 pages. Mm-hmm. And then now we do it every 3 pages, then every 4 pages. And then eventually we work to all 10 pages. And so it's a strategy that I used over the years with my students, is breaking it down into smaller components and then building their self-responsibility of reading as they became stronger readers down the road. And so that's something that you may be able to employ with him. If you go back and just jot down those questions and start working with him. And over the days, you'll start to see he's able to memorize things better. Because I used to say, what is it with the memory that isn't working? Sometimes it's just the processing of information. And let's remember that while we love technology, we do still have some things where technology processes information so quickly. I really believe that it creates a barrier of absorption for us. So we really have to retrain the brain to think in a slower pace and to intake information. And that's what this process does. And when we can break it down that way, we start training our kids to process that information more slowly. So maybe that's something that can help.
We're going to work on that. That's a really good idea. I like the 1 page, 2 page, building on that, because the tests are concerned when they're taking those tests. It is reading this entire section, then they have to turn around and take a test on it. And that's kind of where he struggles. He can read, that's never been the issue. He's always been really good at spelling. It's the comprehension part. Mm-hmm. So what are things that you see that kids struggle with when it comes to literacy and just reading? Is it the words, or is it the comprehension, or is it the combination?
Well, first of all, what you just said, which is why I definitely wanted to share that too with you. Mm-hmm. Kids who read but cannot memorize is much more common than you think. So that's a big one. The second is really decoding. There's a part in education where they really skipped teaching our kids phonetics. How do we sound it out? Long A, short A, E-I-O-U.
Yeah, the letter people.
Exactly.
What happened to them?
we have completely, there was a part where they really just did a lot of sight words. And I was like, wait a minute. There are some words that we know will have to be just memory based because of the way they're formulated. But why aren't we? Last year, my son was a student at Head Start. And by the end of the semester, his teacher had taught him all of the phonetics of the alphabet. And I was like, this could be nothing but God. Okay. Because we had been working on it and I wasn't moving as quickly as I'd liked. And she came in and just ran through them. Mm-hmm. So when we started working on reading, my son could already look and say, cat, cats. That's one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen along the way. And it looks like it's just a certain group. I've had kids that come to me and about this kind of like 8th to 10th grade bubble right now, 6th grade bubble, where they are not familiar with that component, learning how to pronounce words through sounding them out. And we've had to teach them that, because if they only learn through memorization, they can't learn how to figure it out for themselves. And so that's a huge one, because it limits their ability to think, to sound it out, and it limits their reading level. It has really made a lot of them stagnant. So I've had to go back and teach a lot of kids that information. Now, the good news is because they're older, they pick up very quickly. But the trouble is that they miss so much information along the way that we're now trying to catch up to things that they missed in the past. And so those are the 2 biggest things that I feel have been the struggle, is we read, but we can't remember. And then along the way, we have this big bubble of kids who did not get phonetics, which means they don't know how to blend and sound things out. That has been a big trouble that has put a lot of our kids back. Once you teach people the basis of how to read, they can really apply it to anything. And so when we get those skills sharpened, when we teach them how to effectively remember what they're reading and comprehend what they're reading, you can apply that to any level. Now, you may have to break it down to smaller pieces in order for them to absorb the information. But what I always try to teach my clients and my students is that when I teach you this strategy, it works at any level. You just have to be able to make sure you can break the information down the way that student needs it. This student may need the information on a first grade level. It might be see Jack run. And somebody else may be able to read Sophocles. But I need to teach them that I can say who is doing it, when it's doing it, how are they doing it, how do you feel about it at any level. Mm-hmm. Any level. You can identify that. See, that's a part of tiered learning. That's a part of differentiated instruction. And so when we're in the classroom having to work with kids who have various learning issues, we have to make sure that we are dealing with the kid who can't comprehend on the elementary level and the kid who can comprehend on a college level. And so those are some of the things we've seen along the way. Those kids who are on the elementary level of comprehension, they get left behind. That's a big one. That's a big one we see so much. And so when that child comes to me in 6th grade, they've been left behind for so long that they think they can't comprehend. They think they can't comprehend, but we can get them there. Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry, I got a little emotional.
Believe me, I understand, because that's something that we struggle with now that's the expectation. And now that they are bringing writing into every subject, which I like because I am a writer, but my son hates it. But whether it's social studies, whether it's science, whatever subject it is in his school, he's having to write paragraphs for different subjects because of the testing.
I'm so glad that you brought up the component of writing, because for the last 10 years, I've used the same method of teaching for effective writing. And it has been the single most important component of my kids knocking testing out. There's a simple strategy for writing that works for a first grader all the way through a college student. The only thing that happens with writing is it gets longer and your vocabulary becomes more complex. That's it. But it's always introduction, supporting details, conclusion. Always. But the big deal about it is that as it gets bigger, as reading gets more complex, we get away from understanding how simple the format is, and we think that bigger words mean a bigger task. Mm-hmm. When it doesn't, it means more complex language, more complex writing, an ability to be more in-depth. And so with our kids, if we teach them the one simple strategy for writing, it works for every single subject across the board. That's why the school-wide method was working for football coaches, social studies teachers, English teachers, math teachers, because it's just a matter of one method. However, if our kids cannot comprehend well, they cannot explain well. And so that is the problem. We can teach them a method, but if we don't break down the barriers of comprehension, they won't be able to tell us what they read because they don't understand it. And that's regardless of the subject matter. If they can't understand the math problem, they can't write the steps. They can't explain why the method works. And so what you said is so important, connecting that to the writing. Yes, ma'am.
As parents, what are some keys that you would give an early parent, like starting out, just having the baby, just some easy tips as far as reading is concerned? What's something that they start off with, setting the foundation?
So I will always say the infamous Dr. Seuss books are always wonderful because the rhyming is so appetizing to their ears. They enjoy that, hat, jack, cat. They love that sound. So when you read those kind of books, The Cat in the Hat, Horton Hears a Who, Mr. Brown Can Moo Can You, those things appeal to our kids very early. But also identity books. Tay Diggs has a book called Chocolate Me, and I read it to my son, and he was like 2. And even just seeing that little chocolate boy on the front and then reading a book called Chocolate Me, he thought it was the best thing in the world. So identity books are important very early for them because when they look at those books, they see themselves. So giving them something where they can see themselves is going to be very important. And also just talking to them about the book, even if you feel, like I said, that they're not ready to answer questions about the content. Notice with them, what the cover looks like, what the colors are, how does the main character look, well, funny words from the book. I like the word moo. Did you hear that? Let's say moo. Very simple things like that that get your child engaged at a very young age. In addition to that, plain language. Reading is where you come in with plain language, but also in daily conversation. We can be empathetic, sympathetic, and loving while using plain language. What's the matter with you, boo-boo? It's not any more emotional than, what's the matter? Are you okay? Our emotion is displayed through hugging, touching, feeling, not through saying, oh, mommy's little bit. No, you create a culture of really unclear language by doing that, right? So our actions are direct when we talk to them in regular language and empathize with them and hug them. You know, we give 3,000 hugs a day in my house. It's love all day. I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, and so that's where that comes into play. But when we speak language, right, we're not even allowed to speak in a whining language, or you can't get it. Communicate clearly. Let me know what you need. These things are all important, not just when it comes to reading, but in our kids' ability to do what? Start interpreting early and starting to understand the art of language very early. And so how we communicate with them verbally ties into what they do through books and reading. So creating those expectations and a rubric for communication verbally in your household is extremely important. So whatever it may be, you may think baby talk is okay, but you may not think whining when you ask questions is okay. Whatever you set forth, establish a rubric of verbal communication first, and that's going to link you to the books and the writing in the future.
And so then moving up a notch as they get into junior high and high school, and, you know, they have these extracurricular activities. What are some things that parents can do to not make it as burdensome to incorporate learning into the home?
One of the first things I found for junior high kids, some of them do keep a desire to read, but for those who don't, let them watch videos, but have a type of video they have to watch. And we created a rubric. I did this with one of my junior high kids one time. I created a rubric where if you're going to watch a video instead, these are the questions I like for you to engage with, because you're still engaging them. They still have to write. They're just not reading. They're still engaged. They're still practicing. They're still developing. Okay, now I want you to turn that discussion or those answers into a quick paragraph for me. And so once a week, this is what I'm expecting. The other component is that I also started setting incentives. Kids are motivated by the smallest things. I was the teacher that was always like, anybody want food? I had the hungry students. They would eat apples, they would eat hot dogs, they would eat whatever. So setting incentives with them in junior high is going to be very important, because they like things that are incentive driven, and they can be small, but they want to get them. They want to get the gold. The other thing is setting aside read time as a family. So if I have 30 minutes of reading on Wednesday night, the whole house has 30 minutes of reading on Wednesday night, and making it a house ritual where there isn't any other option. You can't say, I don't want to do it because there's nothing else that is expected. It's read time. And so incorporating it still as a mandatory part of the lifestyle, because even if they don't enjoy it now, they will enjoy it later. Lastly, magazines. The biggest trouble for high school kids is junior high and high school kids even, is a lot of times they may not be interested in long readings. But if they like cars, get car magazines, get them a subscription. If your teenage daughter likes Glamour magazine, get her a subscription to Glamour. But before that week is over, she needs to come to you and talk to you about an article that you guys can discuss or engage in, or fill out that rubric that you have. Get them a magazine subscription and allow them to use that as their reading, but something that is information in. They're still taking in vocabulary words. It doesn't matter where it comes from. Your goal is not, we have to pick our battles. We want to control things a lot as parents and look, as teachers. But if I just want my child to read, it doesn't matter. Just get you something that you will pick up, and get something that's going to mean something to you. And we'll get to that point where you'll be interested in other things that I think may matter. So I think those are some of the valuable tips that we can use.
Okay, those are all great tips. So how can one reach you if they want to get more information, if they want to find your books, the group that you're involved in? Just give us all of your information.
So all of my books are on Amazon.com. So you can just type in Jamie Mays, including our newest book, which is the Mommy and Me Cookbook, All of those books are listed there. I'm also on Facebook. You can type in Jamie Mays. Our group is the Education Roundup 360, and we are building that community every day. So please join for the conversation. I am on Instagram, Jamie Mays AOE, and we also have another page called Cooking with Fam, where my son and I share food tips, and we'll eventually be creating our own family YouTube channel to promote healthy eating and engaging in the kitchen. And I also have Twitter, which is Jamie Mays AOE, and I'm on LinkedIn under Jamie Mays. So you can Google me at this point. I'm like, okay, I'm Googleable. Okay, Google. But you can definitely type me into Google, and you'll be able to find all different types of things, including my blog, where I talk about everything from life lessons to culture lessons to education and everything else. So please reach out and connect and let me know if you have questions, or even if you'd like to book me for an event. I'd love to come out and work with you.
Perfect. And I will post all of the links in the notes for the podcast, so people can make sure they can click and find. Well, thank you so much. This was so engaging, so much information. I have my own little notes that I have to go back and finish up so that Mr. Cam has some things to do. But I really think that that's going to help us, and even because he's into basketball and football, so that was a good idea about getting the magazines. And just making him go through those. And I think that'll be helpful, really helpful.
Definitely
to get him engaged and not making reading such a chore or punishment, because he thinks he's punished because he got to read.
Yeah, they do. They start to feel that way. But tapping into their world, and then when they start to see how it's benefiting them, and who knows, look, we have to look at it in a different way. I used to tell, and I'm so sorry, and I'll be done, but I remember when we were in college, they would always say things like, try to discourage athletes, try to discourage people, you're more than just an athlete. But for some people, that's their motivation. And for people who even lived in poverty, maybe that's the only escape they have. So our mission is to teach them how to be the best. If you're a player, how can you become coach? If you're coach, how can you become an owner? And so teaching them how to be the best at where they are, giving them resources to help them understand how to maximize, how to use their money wisely, how to invest their money wisely, how to read more so the power is right in their hand. So you can read the contract for yourself, so somebody else is not signing your paycheck without your money, and you're the one out there working, but you're not the one bringing home the most. Right. We want to empower them with wherever they are. And whenever I started investing in my students differently, they were more willing to check out things that I wanted them to invest in also. And that has revolutionized my ability to engage in a literary world with my students. So I want to leave that as a tip. Tap into their world first. Get engaged with what they're going. Help them find new levels. And I promise you, you will see a different type of return educationally.
That's good. Oh, that's good. Thank you so much, Jamie. Thank you for listening to the Navigating My Crazy podcast. Don't forget to send all of your questions to questions@navigatingmycrazy.com, or you can complete the form on our website at navigatingmycrazy.com/contact. Also, join the community and chime in on the conversations by liking and following Navigating My Crazy on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Subscribe and rate us 5 stars on iTunes or your favorite podcasting platform. Moms, have a great week and get ready for our next Talk It Out Tuesday.